Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kurt Damon.
Hey everybody, it's Ben, coming to you to talk about the new Dune movie. Dune is, it came out this year on streaming at least. I did not see it in the theater. We saw it on streaming at home. I watched it with my wife and all of my kids. Much to my surprise, everybody was pretty captivated by it, and I did not expect that to happen. So let me give you sort of a 2-minute overview of what Dune is and my relationship to the series, which may help to inform how you interpret my opinions and my take on this. So I have never read the books. The books were written, well, for those of you who don't know what Dune is, it was originally a series of sort of sci-fi / fantasy novels written by, I think, Frank Herbert. I don't remember when, but I want to say it was part of that glut of sci-fi we got in the 60s and 70s. Dune is set on a fictional desert planet. If you don't know, this is what provided the inspiration for Tatooine and Star Wars being a desert planet. And Dune kind of laid down a lot of the tropes and, the fluff, I'll call it, sort of world-building background that ultimately was imported into the Star Wars films. So I think, I don't know this for a fact, but just if you watch the Dune film, the new one, you will see a lot of the elements or roots of things from Star Wars in it. Tatooine, the desert planet. Particularly if you look at the original script for Star Wars, back when it was called, I think, The Star Wars, and Luke was going to be Luke Starkiller. The lead character, the Prince, has a lot of similarities to the Luke Starkiller character. His epic journey from being an apprentice and developing these quasi-magical powers through this secretive order of wizards that kind of control the galaxy. And also the kind of the core conflict of Dune is the idea of mining for spice. So this planet that the plot takes place on is an arid desert planet. It's extremely dangerous. It's essentially a narrative proxy for the Middle East. The whole narrative of Dune is about the Cold War, basically. The main family that you follow, sort of the protagonist family, is essentially the United States. There is an opposing antagonistic family that is a stand-in for the Soviet Union. And then the planet itself is rich in this resource that's necessary for hyperspace travel called spice. Spice is, of course, just oil that you get out of the desert, and it is essential for travel on our planet as well. So it is not a very well-disguised allegory. I don't know if it's meant to be or not, but if you watch it, and on top of that, I've never read the books, like I said, but there's a lot of the language and the cultural trappings, I would say, of the native peoples of the planet has a generally Middle Eastern feel to it. The words certainly have an Arabic feel to them. The sandworm, for example, I think is called Shai Hulud. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but just written down, it looks like Arabic. It sounds like Arabic. So again, not a disguised allegory. They're not trying to do anything subtle here. It's very on the nose. There was a movie made in the 80s. Sir Patrick Stewart was in it. Sting was in it. If you go look up the cast list, there's actually quite a few. It was a really good cast. A lot of people that you'd recognize that were popular in the 80s, and some of them still are. I remember watching it with my dad back in the day. I don't remember it very well, and I think I watched it one more time when I was in college, undergraduate school. So we're talking like late 90s. I have not seen it since. I remember thinking it was weird. I remember not really understanding it all that well. I remember thinking that, although it was interesting, the special effects were not great, and that's about all I remember. I do remember the sandworm scene. That's all I remember about. The sandworm is the most famous thing. I believe, okay, so if you don't know anything about the story, I believe the sandworms are these giant creatures that live under the sand, and if you've ever seen Tremors with Kevin Bacon, those are the sandworms, all right? They're these just giant worms that go under the sand. They're extremely dangerous. They hunt by feel, like they can feel vibrations through the world, and they're attracted to rhythmic vibration. So if you're just walking across the sand, they will find you immediately and kill you. So very similar to Tremors. And I think it's the spice that's on the planet that gets mined is, I think, cast off by the sandworms, or something that they produce as like a byproduct, or they secrete it or something. I forget what it is, but they also make the spice. The main conflict of the story is that the main family, the House of Atreides, I think it is, They are appointed to be the caretakers of this planet and to conduct the mining operations to get this spice, the most valuable resource in the galaxy, the most important to commerce. They are appointed by the Emperor to do this. They're kind of set up to fail. And then this starts a war between them and the antagonistic house, which is called Harkonnen, something like that. They're set up to fail, and it starts sort of the whole plot in motion where, the royal family is all killed off except for the one prince who is the main protagonist. And then he has the traditional epic hero's journey. And what I just described to you is basically all that happens in the movie. It's about 2.5 hours long. It introduces you to these families. It introduces you to the setting. They kind of don't waste a whole lot of time getting right down to moving the plot forward. The main family takes over this settlement. They're almost immediately attacked by the other family. And then you sort of follow the main hero's journey, out of this, how he escapes, and then how he kind of learns to discover and use his powers a little bit, and eventually meets up with the native peoples of the desert planet and sort of joins their tribe. So that's the overall plot. I'm not giving away much. If you've read the books, you know this. And if you have ever seen a movie before, particularly an epic fantasy or sci-fi adventure, none of these plot points will surprise you at all, because this is how every one of these movies goes. So if you haven't seen it, I'll leave it there and leave the rest as an exercise to the viewer to kind of watch and enjoy it. What I wanted to comment on more was sort of generally what I thought they did right and what I thought they could have done better. Starting with the good stuff. I was really worried from the previews and from just the basic way that Hollywood films are put together anymore, that this story would be just a non-stop sci-fi action smorgasbord. And while there is certainly something to be said for, check your brain at the door and just enjoy your big dumb action movie, those are fun. I like those. Dune is not that type of story. It's a very intricate, detailed story. Even having not read the books, I know enough about it, and you pick up enough from how this film is put together to get a sense of the scope and breadth of the universe that Frank Herbert built. And when you have something like that, you need to give these scenes some time to breathe. You need to give characters some time to develop. Action scenes where either you don't know what the stakes are or don't care, based on characters that who you're not invested in, are not that exciting. I mean, they're visually fun, they're interesting. The spectacle, is on some level is fun to watch. But if you don't really care about what's happening or who's involved, then it really kind of it's all just empty calories. And this is doubly so if the action scenes are just sort of shoehorned in to provide some excitement and otherwise don't really advance the plot or really serve the purposes of the narrative in any way. This is something that the original Star Wars films did a really great job of. One, getting you to like and care about the characters, and then two, providing action scenes that advance the plot forward in some fashion. Perhaps the movie that did this the best was the most recent Mad Max film, Fury Road. Just did an absolutely fantastic job of really getting you to understand the rules of the world, to importantly hate the bad guy, care about the good guys, and then the action scenes that resulted all served the plot. The things that happened in those scenes came into play later. They mattered in terms of how they changed the relative situations of the characters, what their motivations were, what their goals were. It all just fit together so well. So that's important to have. And going back to Dune, from the previews, I just worried it was going to be just nonstop, just space battles for the sake of having space battles, overly long action sequences that didn't do anything for the plot, didn't really teach me anything about the characters. And that's, again, fun to watch on some level, but empty calories. So I'm happy to say that's not really what they did with the film. There is a little bit of that, but it was much more restrained than I anticipated. The film really opens slowly. They really take their time developing things. And one of the early quote-unquote action sequences is not really an action sequence so much as what I would call a more traditional suspense sequence. It kind of reminded me a little bit of a scene from Flash Gordon, actually, although I'm sure that Flash Gordon got its inspiration from the similar scene in the Dune novels. But there's a scene where the main character has to put his hand inside of some kind of box and experiences some kind of pain or distress. It's not really made clear exactly what the nature of it is, but that's good. That makes the scene more suspenseful when you don't know what exactly is going on. You just have the general outlines of it. So he has to endure this pain, whatever it is, and it's sort of a test that he's being put through. And the fact that they don't tell you exactly what the test is or what he's undergoing, you just can tell that he's in obvious pain and he's struggling, is, what your mind can come up with is way more horrifying than what anybody can actually put on film. That scene was suspenseful, well done, good character building, good universe building, and it was a nice substitute for the usual, we are, 10 minutes into the film and people have been talking for too long and now we have to have an action sequence. Basically bought the story an extra about half an hour to kind of develop the characters and lay the groundwork for the setting and the plot, because there is a lot of work to be done in a film like this to get the audience oriented in it. I, like I said, haven't read the books, not a big Dune fan or anything, so I don't know much about it, but I don't, overall, I'm pretty good about filling in those details in my head and kind of, getting my arms around and understanding what's going on in the story. But I, speaking for myself, I needed that extra time to kind of really understand who the various characters were, their relationships, their motivations, and kind of what was going on. And even then, there were points where I was a little lost in the narrative. I thought they did a nice job of doling out the information you need to understand the plot, doing that in scenes that were well constructed, well crafted, interesting to watch, not too long, didn't contain any unnecessary exposition. If anything, I could have probably have used more exposition. And there's also, I should say, a big cast. I mean, this show has an enormous cast. I shouldn't say show, it's a film. Has an enormous cast, a good cast, lots of good actors in this, and some of whom I think went a little bit to waste and could have done more with. Josh Brolin is in it, but he doesn't do a whole lot. Stellan Skarsgård is in it and is probably my favorite character in this. He plays the main villain and is just fantastic. He's a great actor and he really plays this one up well, and you hate this guy. My kids really loved the actor that plays the lead character, Timothy something, I'm not sure what his name is, but my daughter now has a huge crush on him. Did a fine job. I believed him as this character at least. The other thing I was worried that they would do incorrectly is lean too heavily on the sandworm. The sandworm is very sort of enigmatic, almost I'd say like a defining type of character or element. When you think Star Wars, you think of Jedi and lightsabers. Those are the things that really sort of brand and define that universe. With Star Trek, of course, it's the Enterprise, it's Starfleet, maybe to a lesser extent, Vulcan, Spock, live long and prosper. But it's one of those narrative elements that just is quintessential and defining. So when you think sandworm, you think Dune. And when you've got something like that is what people are there to see, right? The people who don't know much about Dune, if you've never heard of Dune, you've probably heard of the sandworm, or at least you might have know that there is a sci-fi series that has a sandworm that's huge and cool and intimidating. So there's a temptation, I think, to over-rely on that plot element to really get people to feel like they got enough, right? That they came to the table, they got to load up their plate, and when they go away, I got to see the sandworm a lot. But it betrays one of the first rules of filmmaking, which is don't show the shark. This is something that I think, was it Spielberg that did Jaws? That he said afterwards, they had a lot of limitations on the robotic shark they used to film Jaws. It didn't look very realistic, and so they couldn't show it very much. But what your mind imagines is more interesting and more compelling than what you're actually shown. By not showing the shark, you make it more terrifying. Don't show the shark too soon, because once you've seen the monster, the mystery is gone, right? The romance of the unknown is gone, and once you know what it is, it's less scary. And you see good movies really take advantage of this well. They did this really well with Stranger Things. We got many episodes in before we ever got a good look at the monster, and even then, you didn't really get to see what the monster looked like until the very last episode. There was another film that they did that was also kind of similar to Stranger Things. It was also set in the 80s. Oh gosh, what was it called? Oh, Super 8. That's what it was. Super 8. Same kind of thing. There's an alien monster, and they wait until about 2/3 through the film before you actually get a good look at what it is. The sandworm is the same kind of deal. They give you an idea of how it works, some ecological aspects of it. There's a great action piece where they're trying to rescue some guys, some miners from an excavator to prevent the sandworm from eating them and eating it. And so you do get an idea of kind of how the sandworm attacks, what it looks like when it attacks, some of the things that happen, and it's in service of the plot. We get to some character development scenes with that. We get to understand sort of the moral and ethical character traits of the Atreides family. We learn a little bit more about the main character. We learn a little bit more about the environment, how often these attacks happen, how the technology is explained. They bring these little helicopters out to remove the extractor, and one of them breaks, so they can't remove it, so they're just going to lose it. It's all well done that way. way. The scene serves all these different purposes, but they don't show you much of the sandworm. You get to see just a little bit of it, but not enough to really get an idea of the size and scope of it. So that's all done well, and you really don't see the whole. You never see the whole sandworm during the film, but you do get to see one good look at it in sort of a suspenseful but non-actiony scene towards the end. That again serves good narrative purposes and is well constructed. So I thought they were admirably reserved and restrained with how they used the sandworm plot element in the visual narrative. They could have been a lot more obnoxious and just constantly scene after scene of sandworm, but that is not what they did. So I think that there's a lot of recognition and appreciation because it makes for a better film, and I think it is much harder in a big, expensive, lengthy movie like this to convince producers not to overplay the most recognizable and potentially most, marketable and interesting aspect of the universe that you're in. It would be like somebody going to Disney for Star Wars and saying, we need fewer lightsaber battles. That's an awfully hard argument to make. Okay, so that said, what didn't work or what did not work? And this is something that might be impossible to do with a film like this. But although, as much as I've applauded over the course of this podcast episode, the restraint, the emphasis on plot and character development, there's just too much to dole out here. There's too much information to hand out, and I didn't really connect emotionally with any of the characters. To the two characters I connected with the most, there was a pilot character played by, I think, Jason Momoa, the guy that played Aquaman. He was pretty well done. I at least got a sense of his relationship with the main character, and with the main character's mother. I liked her and thought that she had kind of a nice plot arc, although she kind of disappeared from the narrative for a while. The main character, I didn't really. I mean, there's nothing wrong with him. The actor did a fine job with the material. They did a nice job of kind of setting up his destiny, but I just really didn't connect with him. Wasn't really rooting for him. The same way I was for like a Luke Skywalker back when I was a kid. And that might just be a function of age. At this point, watching a movie like this, I'm not going to connect with, some kid in his early 20s the way that I would when I was a teenager or even a little kid. And it makes sense that I might, find a little more emotional resonance with sort of the older mentor type. So some of that might just be my age. But I think part of it is that there was too much background laying to do, too much world building to do to introduce audiences to this story and to these characters. And I think while they tried hard. They really tried to get you to understand the characters and what their motivations were. But I just felt like it still fell a little flat there. I guess at the end of the day, thinking back to Star Wars, which has a lot of analogies to Dune in terms of the challenges of making a film like that, I understood Luke Skywalker's motivations and what he wanted and what his frustrations were. I understood him looking wide-eyed off into the sunset. You just got a great sense of his impatience to move on with his life and go do something bigger and better and not live on a farm. And I think that's just naturally easier for all of us to connect with than some, pampered prince of some high royal house in some strange universe who is swept up into political machinations that are kind of beyond his control or understanding. In that sense, the prince is almost more like Anakin Skywalker in episode 1, where he's kind of swept up into larger events taking place around him, but he's not really in control of any of it. He barely even understands what's going on. And we're not even really sure what his motivations are. And the same with the prince. I think his name's Paul in Dune. Not really sure, like, what are his goals? What are his motivations? Does he seek his father's approval? Does he want to get out of this whole thing and not be part of this royal family? Is there some big tradition or family legacy he wants to maintain? He just seems like a pawn in a greater political game of chess. And that's, all of us have that in our lives to some extent. We're not all in control of everything, but I don't go to the movies to watch somebody else get battered around by fate. So I didn't really ever get a sense of what it is he wants. It's hard to see the stakes and where the plot conflict is, where he is being challenged to not get what he wants. And that's where the dramatic tension of the movie comes from, is we understand what the character wants. The character has to want something, and we have to want them to get it as the audience. That part just didn't come through to me in the film. And so it was more just a story of him surviving the situation he wound up in. And that was interesting enough in its own regard, but I think if they had done more to kind of set up and what his motivations are it would have added a little more personal interest, dramatic tension, and emotional resonance with the audience when there are conflict scenes, when there were action scenes. But it didn't land for me, and I just don't know if that's a function of my age or just that the screenplay just didn't have time to really develop that. So where does that leave us? I think if you like me are generally a fan of sci-fi, of fantasy, or just of big epic films, I found this one overall pretty satisfying. There were areas where I thought it could have been better, but it wasn't overly long. It was certainly plenty long enough without being overly long. And as I understand it, it's the first of maybe a trilogy that's going to be made. So to that extent, I think it does a pretty commendable job of establishing the universe, the characters, the conflicts, the setting. I think they did about as good as you could do in the big theater release format with this type of material. I really don't think the future of sci-fi and fantasy is theater. Not unless you've got like one discrete, very concrete story you can tell in a universe that doesn't require a lot of explaining. A movie like The Martian works really well because it's based in our world. You don't have to explain to me how the politics work. I already understand what NASA is. I already understand what Mars is. I already understand what an astronaut is. So if you're going to release a sci-fi or fantasy, really sci-fi especially, if you're going to release one of these big epic films in the theater, you've really got to take advantage of what the audience already knows to kind of provide gap fillers for elements of the universe that you just don't have time to lay out in the movie format. And that might be why there's so much reliance on existing properties and not creating anything new in the theater format. It's too hard to do in a way that is really satisfying. But the downside of using existing properties is, although you get the benefit of the audience foreknowledge of the universe, that's also a detriment, right? Because then you wind up with what we had with the Star Wars sequels, where people don't, the Star Wars sequels were not really movies. They were movies about making a Star Wars movie. It was just taking a bunch of iconography and elements from prior films, putting them into a blender, and then turning them back out in a new format. And it looked nice. It was fun to watch, but there was no story told. Again, empty calories. So I don't know. It's kind of tough to say how these things should be done. I think that the streaming format is better for this stuff. It gives you more time. It gives you more room to develop the story, to develop the plot points. Stranger Things is a good example of that. They had 8 episodes, and that takes place in our world, but they still had to explain the Upside Down, the monster, and these characters, and they were able to do that, over the course of 8 episodes, and really give the scenes room to breathe. So on that note, I'm also watching the Foundation series, which is streaming. I understand that I have read the books for that one. It's been a minute. I read them about 15 years ago, all in 1 week. So I've only read them once. I kind of remember the general outlines of the plot, but I don't remember the details very well. So I have seen the first episode of Foundation. I will watch the rest and then do a separate review of that series after I finish that. So those are my thoughts on Dune, and appreciate you staying and listening, assuming you did. Talk to you next time.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded in St. Louis, Missouri.